Hello there and welcome to the English Language Club. It's Tuesday and it's time for our club hangout. We've got 20 people watching, which is really awesome. My name is Colin Munro and this is Tony Kulpa. How are you doing, Tony?
Great to be here. Very well. How about you?
Yeah, pretty good. I've had a very stressful 10 or 15 minutes because we had some technical problems at this end, and we literally just fixed those technical issues in the last 30 seconds. So let us know. Can you hear both of us okay? Just give us a yes. in the comments. We've got a lot of new faces today, which is really awesome. So
yeah.
So we've got AJ.
And some familiar faces.
Yeah, some familiar faces. Obviously, AJ in Monaco, Mandolin from California, Choose English.
Lolly.
Choose English from Pakistan. I think that's a new person. Lolly.
Hello.
Great to see you again.
From France.
James Bond in Iraq. That's great. I wonder if that's your real name. Rashida in Algeria. Maria Artist from Kurdistan. Great. Well, it's really great to see you all. Now, I wanted to start off with a quick to respond to a comment we had on one of the videos. I'm going to bring it up on the screen now. Hope you can see that. So Murphy says, may I ask the difference between the sound, or the schwa sound, and I know the schwa sound is unstressed. Do they both come up with the same position of the mouth? Just one is stressed and the other is not? Or may I put it this way? Which is what they look like twins. Thanks. So yes. Yeah. So these two sounds, so the schwa, so the sound and the sound are very, very similar. Let me get Tony back here now. Tony, what is the difference then between those two sounds? Because they are very, very similar.
Yeah. So, as you've shown in the chart before, in all your videos on pronunciation is physical. And you can kind of plot on the chart how far open your mouth is, right? And so the chart really, I think, answers the question, doesn't it? The sound, as opposed to your mouth is a little bit more closed. Your mouth is a little bit more open, right?
So I think one of the things that confuses things a little bit is when you say the sounds on their own, don't really, we end up stressing them and making them.
Yes.
We stress them more than we do in a real word. So the schwa sound is like, as in mother, father. Can you think of some examples with that at the beginning?
About. Amazing.
Whereas the sound is like umbrella, can you think of any other examples? Up.
Underneath, up. Yeah.
Yeah. So the sound is much stronger. The Yeah, and I've got the chart here. I'll just bring that up so I can show what Tony was saying, what was talking about. So here we've got the vowel sounds, and the two sounds are very close to each other on the chart. So you have the schwa sound here, so that's and then And now here, if I read down that column, you can see that my mouth opens more as I go down. So physically, the difference is that the sound, your mouth is more wide open, but it is also stronger. I think, Tony, you have previously described that the schwa sound, or the is a sort of, is it semi-vowel? You say, is that
a half vowel? In linguistics, sometimes there's different names for it, but yeah, in English, in many languages, there's many of these semi-vowels or half vowels, and in English we don't. We pronounce them all pretty much the same, and we use the schwa symbol for one of these. It's kind of barely pronounced. So in a way, it's not just a unique sound. It's also kind of a catch-all for all of these really, really short vowel sounds.
Hmm.
You know.
Yeah. So, Murphy, if you're watching, I hope you are. I hope that was helpful. And I hope that was helpful to some other people as well. They are very similar sounds. And I suppose when, like I said, when you try and say the sound in isolation on its own, without being in a word, it is very easy that they become even more similar.
For sure.
Because we tend to overstress the sound when we say it on its own.
Yes. Because we were talking about this the other day, that the half vowels, the is not normally going to be stressed in any English word. Certainly, that's not going to be the dictionary pronunciation is going to have the stress on the schwa, right? Sometimes you might hear people stress it for various reasons, whether it's a local dialect accent or they're just stressing the word differently for emphasis. But that's not normal. Normal, those vowels are very short. It's almost like they're being skipped, and so you wouldn't hear them stressed. So when you just say it by itself, that's not really the way it's going to come in any word.
Yeah. It's very difficult to say it on its own, really.
It goes against our kind of instincts.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a lot of people watching, which is great. A lot of people saying hello and greetings. But not a lot of questions coming in. So the whole point of these Hangout sessions is to, you give us your questions and we'll see what we can do to answer them. We've got a few coming in now. If this is the first time you're watching, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for being here. I really hope you have a good time. And let us know if you've got any questions, because we'd really love to answer them. So we've got Baba Khan in Bangladesh. Hello. Rashida, we've seen you before. Hello again. Welcome back. Choose English. Greetings, all of you. Greetings to you.
Slava 3D from Belarus. Exciting.
So, Libeth Castellanos. Saying yes, I think, because that when we were asking if people could hear us properly.
Oh, great.
Okay, well, so I think Suzanne has a question. What does top of the table mean?
So does that mean for the IPA chart? What does the top row of the table mean?
Yeah, is that what you mean, Suzanta? I think Choose English is clarifying in the IPA chart. Yeah, so I'll just clarify what I meant by that. I'll bring the chart up again. Because with the vowel section, the top row, your mouth is kind of quite closed as you say the top row. So you have e, I, u, and as you go from the left to the right, your lips go from being spread out to being sort of squeezed in. I can't remember the technical terms. So e, I, u, and that's the same on each row. But as we go down the rows, our mouth becomes more wide open. So the next row is e, o, and then a, r, o. So so from left to right, you have shape of the lips, and from top to bottom, you have how open or closed your mouth is. I hope that's helpful. Unfortunately, we don't have the same sort of physical reference in the other sections, in the consonants or the diphthongs, only in the vowels. Got Tony back up now. It's always nice to see you, Tony.
Thanks. So Hassan asked what the subject is for today, and we don't necessarily have a subject picked out, I don't think. Obviously, so far we've been talking about pronunciation, so if you have pronunciation questions, that's good. But really, I guess we're kind of wide open, aren't we, Colin? Like, just whatever questions people have. Yeah, I mean,
that's how this has gone the last few weeks since we've been doing it. We normally get enough questions from you guys, the audience, the club members, to keep us going for an hour or so. I wanted to bring that comment from from a previous video, because I was going through my comments yesterday. It's something that I don't do as often as I would like to, and I intend to do it more often, and try to respond to everything. It's just there's so many now. It's sort of an endless task. But I can filter it for just the people who are subscribed. So that's what I did yesterday, and I've been trying to go through and answer as many comments as I can from people who are subscribed. And that was one that I came across where I just thought, I can't really write this. I can't really type an explanation because I need to kind of model those two sounds, the and the ah. And so I thought, well, I'll just say check out the live stream tomorrow, and I put the link to it. And
nice,
I thought, we'll talk about that now. So it's not really the theme of the lesson. It was just one question that I thought it would be good to get started with. So yeah.
Well, let's see. Number one has a comment here that I agree with very much, so I'm going to read it out here. Hello, sir. You, meaning Colin, describe present perfect tense so beautifully. Can you please make another video like that on modal verbs also? So I agree. In case you haven't seen them, I think, are there 4 videos on perfect tense, present perfect?
I think there's 3. I think in the videos I say I'm going to do another one, which I never got around to doing. I was going to do
but that's okay
one,
because
I was going to do one on
the
difference between the because there's a slight difference with the present perfect on how it's used in American English and British English, I think.
I think so. A few minor things, yeah.
Yeah, but I didn't get around to doing that yet. But we're actually that was a while ago when I made those videos. But actually, funnily enough, that is actually going to be part of the Inside English course, which those of you who've been watching will know that is what Tony and I are working on at the moment. And that it is actually present perfect. In fact, it was past perfect that I'm in the middle of at the moment. So I'm working on refreshing that, and or at least we're revisiting the present perfect, but within the methodology of the Inside English course.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for saying that I described that beautifully. I am quite proud of that video actually, and I remember when it came to me how the present perfect, it's about, because it's confusing because we're really talking about things that have happened in the past, but it's called a present perfect tense. So why is that? And I really wanted to kind of think of a way how can we describe what that is? And really you're talking about how the present is affected by that thing in the past. Yeah. But anyway, so number one wants me to do a video on modal verbs and also upload that. So yeah, I mean modal verbs. That's probably a subject that could be 2 or 3 videos.
For sure. Yeah.
That could be a sort of later module in the Inside English course.
Yes,
possibly.
We've talked about that.
Yeah.
Because modal verbs are this interesting thing, because Inside English is mostly about tense, because I think that's where there's a lot of underlying rules there, but a lot of times people either don't see the rules, they don't see the logic to it, or they're just taught, don't worry, there's not a pattern, you just have to memorize this long list of rules with lots of exceptions. So we've really focused in on grammar and on tense within grammar, at least for the first installation of the Inside English. Yeah. So modal verbs are something that is added on top of tense. It's part of tense. It's really tightly interwoven with tense, but it's another layer. So to begin with, of course, we're peeling back those layers. Another good example that we talked about a few weeks ago is the passive. Something happened to me as opposed to I did something. Right? Those are extra layers. And we definitely are talking about those in the Inside English course. The first kind of goal is to provide that foundation on how the tenses work, like peeling back all the layers and really focusing in on that. So, yeah, what is it, do you think, that makes modal verbs so difficult? I mean, you just addressed why the present perfect is so difficult, but why is it that people have a hard time with modal verbs, do you think?
Well, I guess because, like you said, they're another layer on top of on top of tense, and tense is kind of often difficult enough as it is. And I think that we don't focus enough on auxiliary verbs. We focus too much on the form of the main verb when we learn about tense, which sort of makes it easier to learn in a superficial way, but it does create problems when you try to get deeper. And so maybe so then using modal verbs is going deeper, where suddenly things don't make sense. People haven't learned properly how to use the auxiliary verbs and how the auxiliary verb affects the next verb in the sentence and things like that. So but then there's different modal verbs, and there's modal verbs of what is it, probability or more possibility, obligation, and there's
necessity.
Yeah.
So there's several different kind of flavors, and then there's different words within those different kinds that have slight different variations in intensity as well.
Yeah. And another reason, like for example, I have to go. That sort of sounds very similar to the present perfect because we're using the have auxiliary verb.
Yes.
But when we're saying have to, that's actually a modal verb. You could use that modal verb with the present perfect, in which case you would say, you have to have been living here or whatever, So you could actually have as a modal verb twice in the same sentence. So it can get very complicated. So that's another reason why it's confusing. Also, one interesting thing with have to is that is like an obligation. You have to. It's very similar to must. Although I would say it's maybe slightly less obligation than
slightly lower,
but still an obligation. And that's and it translates very, very literally in a lot of languages like Spanish and Portuguese. They say tener que means have to. But in Spanish and Portuguese, when you make it negative, when you say no tienes que, then that is like you mustn't. It becomes a negative obligation. But in English, when you say you don't have to, it's not a negative obligation. You've just removed the obligation. So then it becomes you can if you want to, but you don't have to. So then it's like the complete opposite meaning. So in the positive, it's the same meaning, but in the negative, it doesn't translate the same. So that's another confusing thing, I think, perhaps because of the way it translates into other languages inconsistently.
Yes, that's definitely true. It's also wrapped up in the subjunctive, which is another question we have. The subjunctive is not only, but largely communicated through modal verbs, and the subjunctive is difficult. So that definitely makes it one extra level of complexity. So modal verbs, there's probably several videos, but it's definitely something that we're going to be working towards, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. We want to cover this core ideas and cover all the main tenses, and then look at sort of. We'll go through the plan of the course. So,
sure,
module 1 is covering these core ideas and kind of an overview of the tenses and how and talking about how important auxiliary verbs are. Then we're just going through all the tenses. So module 1 is all of the continuous tenses. Module 2 is all the perfect tenses. And no, is that right? That's not right.
Well, module 1 is the core ideas. Module 2 is the continuous.
And 3 is the perfect tenses. 4 is the simple tenses. Now we've deliberately done it in that order because it's like the simple tenses often get treated as if they're the easiest one, and it sounds like
as
they're
if
easy.
Simple means easy, but it does not in this context.
They're not called the simple tenses because they're easy. They're called because so when we talk about it being continuous or perfect, that is the type of action, and the simple type of action. There's nothing really simple about it, but there just is no type of action. Really.
Yeah. It's just you're leaving out that information.
Yeah.
So that's why it's called simple, because it's less information to convey. But that doesn't mean it's easier to understand or use by any means.
No.
That's like saying, well, body language is simpler than actual communication because there's no grammar. Well, yeah, but it's very easy to misinterpret someone's body language.
So in order to sort of say how there is no type of action, we thought, well, we better teach the types of action first, and then we can say that there is no type of action when we get to the simple. So then I think module 5 is going to be some comparing of the different modules, comparing the different tenses, and there's going to be it's not just going to be videos. There's going to be exercises and things as well. So it'll be like comparing the present perfect and the past simple, for example, because they're very easily confused. And then we're going to do a couple of modules with things like the passive voice and things like that. And we've got nine modules planned, and definitely I think modal verbs can come into that somewhere.
Yes.
And it's something that we can always add more onto later. I plan to, once we've got up to module 4 written, to actually film them and release it, and then add module 6, 7, 8, 9 later. And who knows, we might get some more ideas for other things we want to include, or we might do to keep Inside English focused on that core idea and not, have, because there's all these layers on top, and that's what we want to peel back. So we might do an Inside English 2, which looks more at the layers as a separate course. So perhaps modal verbs could come into that. So let's move on then. Lolly Lolly says,
lots of questions.
Assumption and supposition. Are these words interchangeable? Thanks. So I assume something, I suppose something. Are they interchangeable? Sometimes, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, technically, they do mean different things. But I think that most of the time, unless you're talking about a very specific, like, to mathematicians, they would mean different things, for instance. But I think in most conversations, they're probably pretty interchangeable. Yeah. Because the difference in meaning is very technical.
Right. So what is that technical difference in meaning?
So an assumption is a core sort of an idea. It's something that you're taking for granted as the sort of the bedrock of your thought process. So you're starting off from a perspective of you assume that things like gravity and things like right or wrong, these sort of things, you can't necessarily prove it. You're just taking it for granted, but sort of intentionally. A supposition is something that you bring into a situation and you already think that's true. You may or may not know it, and it's going to affect how you think about things. So we all have our suppositions, our preconditions of how we think about the world, and they may or may not be true, but they definitely affect how we think, what we do, all sorts of things like this. Yeah. So as you can see, that's pretty close in meaning. So most of the time, I wouldn't worry about the difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think assumption is probably more common also than, say, supposition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, then I think you already touched on this, but just to make sure, Hassan says, what is the subjunctive and where can it be used? You already touched on that.
We talked about this, yeah. Like when you're trying to express that something might be true or could be true or is conditional on something, that's when we use the subjunctive. When we're not talking about facts, we're talking about possibilities, right? Yeah, and that's another layer on top of tense that we talked about. Yeah.
Okay, then Susanna says, I heard the phrase mothering and othering. I didn't understand what they really meant. Is that a sort of idiomatic expression? It's not one I'm very familiar with. Mothering and othering. I mean, it rings a bell, but it's not something you would use
It's
myself.
not an idiom. It's an introduced term. It's like like kind of like the keto diet or the paleo diet. Like it's a name that someone came up with and has started to
like a brand
put out
for what?
Kind of, yeah. It's a really weird one. I don't know if we really need to go into it. It's a parenting idea where you try to mentally and emotionally connect yourself with your child. Um,
Right.
I couldn't really explain it in great detail.
Mm.
Um,
Okay,
but yeah,
so it's
it's a
a
parenting
child's
technique.
parenting technique. Yeah, it's the name of
Similar
the
to the way that like diets get a name, that it's the name for a parenting technique, sort of, yeah.
right.
Also, Susanna asked what an individual spectrum means. I'm not
Mm.
entirely sure uh, if you mean an individualism spectrum or the individual versus communal spectrum. So I'm not sure what that is just by itself, though. Maybe give me some more context to that, and maybe I can tell you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And Rashida asks, what is the purpose of phonetics? Well, good question. So you don't. Phonetics is a tool to help with
Is a tool.
pronunciation.
Yes.
Now, not everyone is going to find it helpful, and
Yes.
in which case I would say you don't waste your time on it if it's not helpful.
Right.
So the purpose of phonetics is to sort of examine kind of scientifically the production of sound in
Hmm.
speech. And the goal is to, well, at least as learners of English as a second language, to improve pronunciation. Um, Now, phonetics is a kind of science unto itself as well. So, there are phoneticists out there who study phonetics just as a science.
Hmm.
So you can get you can get very deep into it. I mean, it's a subject that goes very deep, I'm not. My knowledge doesn't extend that far. I often get a lot of questions that are way beyond me. But because I just focus on what I think is helpful for people learning English as a second language. Um, so yeah, in the context of the English Language Club and for people learning English as a second language, I would say the purpose of phonetics is a tool to help you learn English. It's not something you need to know if you
Hmm.
don't find it helpful, but it's a tool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Um,
So for helping you kind of predict how a word is going to sound when you say it out loud, or figuring out how to make the sounds, this kind of stuff. That's what its purpose is.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then we've got a question here from Libeth. So, what kind of exercises can we practice to get good pronunciation in English?
Hmm.
Well, so looking at phonetics and breaking the sounds down into the breaking words down into the individual sounds is one
Sounds,
good
yes.
way. And one thing we always say, we've already said it in this live stream, is that pronunciation is physical. So
Yes.
when you're thinking about phonetics and pronunciation, try to think about the position of your mouth, the position of your tongue, and where the sound is coming from. You need to pay attention to those things. You can't really just listen to a sound and then try to make it. You need to kind of
No.
think about where is the sound coming from. I'll give you an example.
Yes.
The sound, as in the word think and thought, that is a sound that is not used in a lot of languages, like Spanish, for example. They don't really use
Latin
that
American.
sound. Yeah, they are more likely to say z. And that's why
Hmm.
you get people saying think. I think. I think. That would be more Indian, maybe.
Different ones
Yeah,
will give, yeah, either a T or a D or a
yeah.
Z or different
And
combinations. Yeah.
Um, so it's physically you're completely unaccustomed to making that sound. And you need to stick your tongue out to make that sound correctly. And that feels
Yes.
very strange if you're not accustomed to doing it. Think. Um, so, so that's why I would say it's really useful to, yeah, think about the physical side of it. But then the other thing, there's a sound which is not on the phonetic chart that we use because it's not used in English. But it is. This is an example of how phonetics actually goes a lot deeper than what we have on our phonetic chart and what we talk about in our videos. There's a sound called the trill, which is that sort of
Yes.
the rolled R sound. We don't actually use that in English. And a lot of people who use it in their language, it kind of creeps in to when they're speaking English,
Yes.
and they struggle to say r, and they say r.
Yes.
So they're making that sound with the tongue rather than with the lips. Instead of going r, 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 they're trying to go r, 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 and it's not quite right. So that, yeah, I would say focus on the physicality of phonetics, of pronunciation. I hope that's helpful, Libeth. Mudassir says, Sir, when we write a comment, please tell us our mistakes regarding grammar, spelling, etc. We are pupils here. At least I don't mind it in public. Okay, yeah. I mean, what I try to do is when I read the comment, I try to correct it as I read it out.
Right.
So you might notice me not read a comment exactly as it's written in the chat. That's because I'm trying to correct it as I read it. So yeah, thanks for that. We'll bear that in mind. I do try to do that. Let's see, Nil Gyuri. I think this is the first time we've seen you. You're very welcome. Thank you.
Welcome.
Would you quickly talk about how Webster changed American English in spelling and pronunciation? What are the pros and cons of what he did? Well, Tony, that sounds like a brilliant question for you.
Well, so there's this idea that Noah Webster was very frustrated with English, and he always wanted to write a dictionary, and he couldn't. And then when the United States got its independence, he celebrated, and he was like, hooray, I can write my own dictionary and fix all of these annoying, complicated things. And so that's really, it's a funny story, but that's essentially the idea of what Webster wanted to do, is he wanted to simplify some things and remove unnecessary complications. Now, obviously, he did not remove all of the unnecessary complications, because we have a million words that are O-U-G-H that are all pronounced differently, rough and tough and bow and thought and so on, right? But he did take a few things and he simplified them. One of the most obvious examples is any word that ends in O-U-R in British English generally ends in O-R in American English. Color, honor, this kind of stuff, right? So a lot of it was just that. He wanted to simplify the spelling. And this is actually a lot more complicated than it sounds, because consistent spelling was still a relatively new idea at that time. So there were different competing dictionaries. So in a way, his dictionary was just one of many. But that was actually another big part of it, is he wanted American spelling to be standardized. So I think actually our next question from Jacques is what would be standard English, and that English as a global language should have an English academy. So Noah Webster would agree with you. He said, well, there should be a defined English that everyone has as the same. The spelling should be the same. The pronunciation should be the same. And so that's why he published his dictionary. Now, now maybe he was right in his day, but nowadays, I think the opposite is really true. English is a global language because there is no English academy. Yeah. Because no matter where you go, people speak English and they make it their own. It melds and it morphs over the years. It's so easy to add words to the dictionary now. Even Webster's dictionary adds words like Google and FaceTime.
Yeah. We talked about this, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we talked about this quite a lot, because I'd had a conversation with Gaspar, one of my students. I think he's watching now, and about Portuguese, and how there is a sort of academy that decides what is true Portuguese and what isn't, and all of the Portuguese speaking countries have sort of signed a treaty to agree that what they say is true Portuguese. And I think it seems as though, although in theory that looks like it seems like that would be a good idea and it would make things easier to learn, in reality it's meant that people have to learn. What Gasper was saying, that what he learned at school is now no longer proper Portuguese because it's changed. Things have changed, and it also means that some countries are not able to sort of put their own national identity into their version of the language.
Yes.
So
and it can actually be even more brutal than that. There have been countries who have basically told another country, you aren't allowed to use this language. You're not allowed to call it this language because it's changed so much. And so you have to do everything new. And you're not allowed to use the same spelling. You're not allowed to use the same words. You have to come up with all new dictionaries and new grammar and new orthography and new phonetics on your own because your language is too different from ours. And so we can't let you call it that anymore. And so sometimes this like universal language and like organization and regulation has been used as like a weapon against countries that were seen as being lesser. So again, English doesn't do this. It's very welcoming, and there's Indian English, Pakistani English, Egyptian English that are a little bit different. And maybe if you had a textbook, a British textbook or an American textbook, they would say, well, this is wrong. But it isn't wrong. It's just a different English, because English is like a blob that constantly grows and reshapes itself.
Yeah. So I think English as an international language is what we try to teach at the English Language Club, and we embrace its diversity. That's why we've got me as a British teacher and Tony as an American teacher living in Canada. But yeah, we acknowledge that there's lots of different forms that are all correct. So yeah. Now, Composer of the Future says, anybody here want to talk? Now that is a very interesting point, because we would like to be able to talk to you all, and at some point in the future we do intend to do some sort of Zoom calls and things so we can get you all in and you can all talk and we can hear you. That would be great. So yes, stay tuned, join the mailing list, subscribe to the YouTube channel, so that when we start doing that, you'll hear about it and you can join us, because we would love to actually properly speak to you soon. Right now we're focusing on writing this course, which should be another month or two, and then we'll start diversifying the content that we're putting out. So look forward to meeting you. Suzanne's asking, he seems busy or he seems to be busy? Which one is correct? Well, they're both correct.
Yes.
He seems busy. He seems to be busy.
Yes.
Yeah, they're both correct.
They're both fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not that
you could also say it seems that he's busy. All of those are perfectly acceptable ways to say that.
Yeah. Now, Hassan says, I have an idea, if you don't mind. And later on he says, leave the grammar, and every week we choose a topic and we have a discussion. I mean, that's a good idea. We have sort of done that in the past. Like 1 week, a few weeks ago, there was a lot of questions coming up about idioms. So we said, okay, look, let's talk about idioms next week. And we gave sort of some homework and said, so think up some idioms and we'll talk about that. But I think with these Hangout sessions, we like to kind of be open to what the questions that people have on the day, rather than because what I can imagine what would happen is if we set a theme, and a lot of people aren't really interested in that theme, or they've got questions about something else. I don't want to have to ignore them. Now, I think once this grows, once we start getting thousands of people watching instead of dozens, then we might need to do something like that. But for now, when we're just getting 20, 30 people watching, I think this way is better, because we can talk to you individually and answer your questions individually.
It can be kind of hard jumping around to wildly different topics, but it's also
Yeah.
kind of fun.
Yeah.
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 So let's see. Can you show us examples? Yeah, Bal. Can you show us examples of how to pronounce an plus a noun in a sentence smoothly? That's a really great question, because
It is, yes.
I was thinking about that a minute ago, and if I was to sort of say, "Would you like an apple?" That is saying an plus noun, an apple, but that's not how we would say it in real life. We would say, "Would you like an apple?" So
Yes.
yeah, an is the word, but in reality we say an apple. Would you like an apple? So how would
the short answer is you don't pronounce it like it's a separate word. You just pronounce it like it's a prefix, really.
An apple.
Yeah.
An apple. Yeah. Yeah. So it's it very much merges in with the noun. I'm gonna have to get my friend.
To be honest, it's kind of halfway. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say I'm gonna have to get my friend Emma from Pronunciation. She has a YouTube channel called Pronunciation with Emma. I'm gonna have to get her on one day because she's really good on questions like this. But yeah, I mean that's basically it. You can say it very. It merges in with the next word.
Yes.
An apple.
I guess I said prefix, and it really is somewhere halfway between, right? It's not fully its own word, and it's not fully a prefix. It's melded, but part way. So an apple, an airplane, but you don't say an apple. You say an apple, an airplane, an Ethernet network, so on, right?
Yeah.
So Santa is saying earlier we were talking about an individual spectrum. Says I lost the context because I hear them on different radio interviews. So give me a general idea. The best I could say is that the individualism spectrum is kind of whether you care more about the individual or more about groups, right? So do you place more of an importance on individual people and their own needs or own desires, or on the group desire, or what's the best for the people would say the greater good or the common good, and it's not that either of these are bad. Some people like psychiatrists and counselors need to be really good at focusing in on one person and their needs, and other people like government officials and stuff like this need to be good at caring about the greater good and larger numbers of people. That's probably the best answer I can give you to what the individualism spectrum is.
Now, Susanto is going back to the when we were talking about pronunciation of the th sound, and I said you have to stick your tongue out. And just when I put my tongue out, I destroy the sound. How far should the tongue be out? Okay, so think about this another way. When we say the word think and thought, that we're making that sound by blowing air through our top teeth, and we need to use our tongue to direct the air there. Okay, so the tongue doesn't need to stick out very far. You can just touch the tip to your teeth, as long as you're blowing air through the teeth, because that's how that sound is being made. Okay, so yeah, you don't have to. Maybe I focus too much on saying you have to stick your tongue out, but really, really, you need to just touch the top teeth with your tongue.
Yes.
Think. Yeah. Hope that's helpful. Cask Learning Park says, "I like your class, sir. Thank you very much." And then Win says, "I'm a bit confused here. So your hair is wet. You swim for a long time."
So I assume this is put the word in the brackets into the correct tense form?
Yes, I'm assuming that. It's not a observation of my hair's not wet.
No, so the question, the thing here is that this is not how you would normally ask this question. You wouldn't normally say, your hair is wet. You swam for a long time? You could say that, but that's not the normal way you would say it, right? You would say, did you swim for a long time? Because when you ask a question, you put what changes is actually the auxiliary. not the main verb. So the main verb isn't actually going to change form. The auxiliary does, and it changes position.
Yeah, and this is exactly why we need Inside English. This is exactly the issue that we are tackling with Inside English, because making questions and using the right tense, it's all about the auxiliary verb. Well, not all about it, but auxiliary verbs really get overlooked. So we're really trying to bring it back to that, because that is the core. That is what is Inside English. And that's what this course is all about. Yeah, great question. But you could. That's not the only tense. You've answered that question in the past simple tense, but you could also say, "Your hair is wet. Have you been swimming for a long time?"
Yes.
So you could use the perfect continuous. Have you been swimming? That's a bit more of a complicated tense because it's got two auxiliary verbs. You look tired. Have you been working hard? Or did you work hard?
So
and
just to make this extra confusing, you can even say, "Hey, you work too hard," but it's not really the primary. Like, that's not really the main way you want to be using the present simple there.
It's a layer. It's a layer that adds on later. It makes things more complicated. Yes, you want to learn it at some point, but get to the foundational idea of how we form a question with using the auxiliary verb with the order of the words. Auxiliary verb, subject, main verb.
Totally.
Did you do you work too hard, or did you work too hard? Okay, let's see. Sir, please, so here we've got Sadari. Sir, please make a video on words that are used in the medical stream, like nurse and medicine and doctor. So medical English, I mean, there's a lot of people who are learning English because they are doctors in their own country and they want to either move to the United States or move to the UK to practice medicine there. And there are tests that people specifically want to train for, that people with English as a second language need to do, and some of these tests are quite difficult. You have to sort of go in and actually see. They're not real patients, but they get actors to pretend to be sick, and you have to go in and treat them, and the way that it's not just about the language you use, but it's the way you speak to them, the way you treat them, is all graded. And I did work with one student in Paraguay who was training for one of those, or practicing for one of those exams. So that's a good idea. That's definitely.
I'm pretty good at pronouncing technical terms, so maybe we could do something like that if we had a good list of words to do.
Yeah. But then, I mean, it's quite a big subject in its own right, really. So, I mean, that's definitely an interesting thing. It'd be great to do some videos on that. But there's so many other things that I want to do videos on first. So we'll see if we can get to that someday. Hi everyone from Buenos Aires. Norma Bogado says, "Hi everyone from Buenos Aires. Could you explain aspiration sounds? Please." Well, aspiration. There's a quick, easy way to say this. Look, if you put your hand in front of your mouth and say those sounds, you should be able to feel the breath on your hand. Another thing you can do is, if you get a piece of paper. 1 second. If you get a piece of paper and you hold it in front of your mouth as you say those sounds, you'll see it move. P, t, k. Whereas other sounds, other consonant sounds like you don't see the paper move, because the sound is not made by breathing air out. Aspirated sounds are sounds that are made by air coming out of your mouth. Does that make sense? It's quite a simple Simple
Yep.
answer.
Those are aspirated sounds. Yeah.
Yeah.
When the air is puffing out of your mouth. Yeah.
Yeah. So Win says, what is the difference between present perfect and present perfect continuous? Okay. So let's give an example. Present perfect. I have lived in New York. Present perfect continuous would be I have been living in New York. So now I'm in England right now, but maybe I lived in New York in the past for 1 month. So I could say I've lived in New York because at this point in time, it's present perfect. So at this point in time, I have the experience, I have the memory of living in New York. Now, when I say that in the present perfect continuous, I have been living. So because it's continuous, it's in process now. So, but when we use the perfect,
to me, it's about emphasis.
Yeah.
What does the perfect and what does the continuous emphasize? The perfect tells me I'm talking about the result. I'm talking about how this has affected me now. When you use the continuous, you're emphasizing the fact that it's ongoing. So when you use the perfect and the continuous, you're emphasizing both that you've accomplished something, you've completed a certain period of time, for instance, and that you're still working. An example I've given about this is you could say, I have studied English, right? Or you could say, I have finished my homework or whatever. And you're emphasizing the fact that you've accomplished this. You could say, I have studied English for 2 years. So you're emphasizing the fact that you've done 2 years. But if you use the present perfect continuous, you say, I have been studying English. You're emphasized that you're not just finished 2 years. I've been studying English for 2 years, but you're continuing. So it's a matter of emphasis.
Yeah.
That you want to be proud of the fact that you've accomplished something, so you use perfect. But you want to point out that you're keeping going, so you use continuous. And you can use both. That's one of the main reasons you would use, I think, the present perfect continuous. You want to emphasize both. So in your case about like living in New York, when you say, oh, I have lived in New York, that could just be in the past. And when you say, I have been living in New York, you're emphasizing that you're not getting ready to leave necessarily. Right?
Yeah, you're still there. Yeah. So what Norma asks, what does devoicing mean?
Okay.
So now remember earlier I was saying some things in phonetics are beyond me, and so that's not really. I'm not familiar with that. Is that something you know anything about, Tony?
I think this refers to singing. You know how in singing or in poetry sometimes you'll leave out a syllable? I think devoicing is where you don't voice a letter that should be voiced. Right. So you make a P instead of a B because it sounds better as part of the lyrics of a song or of a poem. So I think that means where you intentionally don't voice something. It's not really an important phonetics concept that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. Like to literally devoicing, because you've got the sound, the consonant sounds that are voiced. So yeah, if you just don't voice them, or maybe you voice them less. So for example, th and th, those two sounds, my mouth is doing exactly the same thing. The only difference is that th is voiced and th isn't. But there, you can voice a sound to a varying degree. So to devoice, it must be to just do it less or not at all. I presume.
Yeah. I don't. I think that might be what it's referring to.
Yeah. Okay. So Daria again is asking for requesting us to make some videos on medical terms. Okay. We'll definitely. Well, I'm not going to promise we can do it soon, because there's so much to do, but it's definitely on the list.
Sugar Genius also later on is asking for that same thing, so maybe.
Okay, well maybe that's a niche that is untapped, that could be a good thing to do. So we'll definitely consider that, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hassan says, how close are you to the Rocky Mountain? Are you?
So Hassan just said that they had to go. So if you haven't left yet, I'll go ahead and answer this question for you. I don't live right now. I live in Eastern Canada, which is not anywhere near the Rocky Mountains. But I used to live several years ago. I used to live in a place where, from my back windows of my house, I could see the Rocky Mountains, and the front window of my house, I could see the Great Plains. It was very, very beautiful, and it was fantastic. But right now, I don't live anywhere near them.
Mm-hmm. So Trung has just arrived. Hello. I guess I got in late, he says, but doesn't matter. You're very welcome. You're welcome to most people pop in and out. So that's great. Great to see you. Hassan's saying he loves Canada. Sugar Genius. Hi guys. Hello there. You're very welcome. If you have any questions. Suzanne's saying an apple. So like we were talking about when we use the word "an," we merge it in with the following noun.
Yes.
So Sugar Genius says, "Sir, I need help on how to pronounce general medical terms." Okay, so that's what you were referring to. Yes. Okay. Well, that's interesting. That there's a lot of people asking for medical terms. So maybe a lot of people are studying medicine. That's interesting. Okay. So, any other questions? Is it right to pronounce... so this is Armin says, is it right to pronounce the sound D instead of T in the word city? Well, so a lot of people would say city. So this comes down to that dropped T that we've talked about a lot.
Yes, this keeps coming up. We should call this podcast the Dropped T podcast.
And now, and we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. How we do it in both American English and British English, but when making more of a D sound, you're going to sound more American when you do that. So in British English, I mean, really, it's correct to try to say the T, city. That's the correct pronunciation. That in terms of that's what, if you're learning English as a second language, that's the sort of model you should be aiming for. Mm-hmm. But you will notice that a lot of native speakers will say things like city if they're British, or city if they're American.
Mm-hmm. So letter are all things you will hear.
The trouble is, although there's nothing wrong with that, they're definitely not wrong. They're sort of regional variations. I think if as someone learning English as a second language, if you try and model a regional variation, it's going to be you're more likely to be misunderstood. So I would say try to model the pronunciation, the kind of standard RP, IPA, form of the pronunciation, which would be city.
Generally speaking.
Okay. So, by the way, Nilgiri, by the way, lads, Spanish never uses the English Z sound as in buzz. Nowhere that I know of Castilian Spanish uses that as in thin sound. Z is pronounced like thin as in C and C. Okay. So
yes. And then later saying Latin American Spanish would say as in S, like as in miss. So the classic example that we always use to show this is the word for to cross. In Castilian, it's cruzar. In Latin American, it's cruzar, right? Not really. Neither way would you pronounce it cruzar. The way an American would, for instance, pronounce a Z sound or a Z sound.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, because I did maybe misspeak earlier on, so I apologize for that. But thank you for correcting me.
But certainly there are regional variations, and to go back to that idea of the TH, the way people pronounce a sound usually depends on how they pronounce similar sounds in their own language when they're learning English, right? And so you can often tell where someone's from by the specific words or sounds that they pronounce in different ways.
Okay. So
Let's see.
getting a lot of sort of references to questions that we've answered. I think we've covered these. Well, it's been an hour now.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, Katie Barrosa says, I'm from Brazil. My English is in progress. I'm learning from your videos. Thank you very much. That's great. I'm always love to hear that people are learning from us. Yeah, that's what this is all about. Yeah, thank you for watching. And I'm really glad you're finding it useful. Armini says, thank you so much. Marce says, hello, thank you for the class. Could you please talk about defining and non-defining relative clauses? That's a big one. So, well, I guess it's quite simple actually. So,
yes, I think so.
If I say the driver drove very fast, and yeah, hang on. That is that.
So we're talking about. So if we say, so for instance, the man who lives next door,
right,
is a friend of mine, right? Yeah. That would be an example of a defining.
Yes, that's a defining relative clause. Because if you say the man is a friend of mine, you're not defining which man we're talking about. So it could be any man. So when you add that little clause to define it, that it becomes a defining relative clause. So just say you're just specifying when you use a defining relative clause, you're sort of breaking the sentence open in order to add in a little bit to make it more specific.
Yes.
Yeah. The man who lives next door is a friend of mine. So yeah, that's basically the difference between a defining and a non-defining relative clause.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's another subject that deserves a video in its own right.
Yes, relative clauses are great. They're a great way to really kind of up the complexity of your English. But of course, the fact that they're more complex means they're a little bit harder to use. But they are great. I'm a big fan of relative clauses. I see Jorge. I haven't seen Jorge so far this stream, so hello, welcome back. Popped in just to talk about that dropped T again and remind us that is called the flapping allophone, like as in daddy. So city, letter, better. It's that dropped T that sounds like more of a D is called the flapping allophone. Yeah. So thanks for reminding us. I remember you brought that up one other week. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's going to draw things to a close for today. I'm really glad we were able to do this class today because, like I said, we were having some technical issues.
It was close.
Literally just before we started, we were panicking for half an hour, and I literally sorted out the issue with 10 seconds to go. So really glad we were able to do this today, and we'll be here again next week. So have fun studying English. If you get any questions for us, write them down so you can bring them next week, and we'll have another session next Tuesday. So yeah, that's it for now. We'll see you next time.